7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Toodle doodle doo doo doo. One. Almost forgot. Okay, so this is the second morning session of September 1st, 2019. And so we've gone through so far in our survey of the different citas. We've covered the unwholesome citas, the rootless citas. And now we come to the sense sphere, beautiful citas. And these sense sphere, beautiful citas, you could see, are divided into three classes. The wholesome, which are the karmically active states of consciousness, the resultants of these wholesome citas, and these resultants of the wholesome citas, these citas also have roots. They have beautiful roots. And then there are the sense sphere functional citas. These are the citas of an arahat that correspond to the sense sphere wholesome citas. They're pretty much exactly the same, except that, you see, a wholesome citta is a citta that creates wholesome karma. An arahat doesn't create any more karma. When all of the defilements are eradicated, there's no more creation of more karma leading to more rebirth. So the cittas of the arahat, when he does, we would judge them as beautiful deeds, could be generosity, loving kindness, wisdom, and so forth, but they're not creating wholesome karma, so they're considered just functional cittas. So the distinction of these different wholesome cittas, again, this is a rather quick survey. Okay, so these are the sense sphere beautiful cittas. So they can be accompanied by two kinds of feelings, either a feeling of joy or happy feeling, pleasant feeling, or a feeling of neutral feeling, which is called equanimity, neither pleasant nor painful. Then some of these cittas, wholesome cittas, can be associated with knowledge or understanding or wisdom. Others occur dissociated from knowledge. So we have two, two, two. Some could be prompted. For example, if I'm reluctant to give something and somebody says, oh, you should give, it's wonderful to give, it's a great quality, you'll feel happy if you give. So then, at first I'm a little reluctant, but then through this prompting, I give something, so that would be a prompted citta. But if I give spontaneously, because I want to give, that's an unprompted citta. So when you take the different permutations, then we get 8 kinds of wholesome citta. Actually, the same types of cittas can be wholesome, can be resultant, or can be functional. And if we have the cittas dissociated from knowledge, how many wholesome roots do we have? How many beautiful roots? Speak up. 2. What are the 2? Right. Non-greed, non-hatred. No, not necessarily, because non-delusion is the equivalent of knowledge or wisdom or understanding. So the citas that are associated with knowledge have 3 wholesome roots. They have non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Whereas the citas that are dissociated from knowledge have the 2 beautiful roots, non-greed, non-hatred, but not non-delusion. And so our task as practitioners is to try to generate as many citas accompanied by knowledge or wisdom as possible, because that creates the strongest wholesome foundation. So these citas can occur in 3 ways. When they occur as karmically active citas, they're called wholesome citas. They can also occur as resultants, and we're going to see how they occur as resultants. The same constitution of those citas. And then in the case of the Arahat, when the Arahat goes about his ordinary day-to-day tasks, they're called functional citas. Okay, so these are the 8 sense sphere beautiful citas. Wholesome, resultants, the results of the wholesome karma, and the purely functional citas. Okay, so with this, we've finished our survey of the sense sphere citas. And maybe some of you might feel like bewildered and confused by all of these different types of citas. But what I have to say is, to really learn the Abhidhamma, it's not a matter that you can get in just like a 1-day or 2-day exposure, but you have to work with this material over a long period of time, repeatedly, and then it starts to make sense, to sort of crystallize. Okay, now we come to the fine material sphere citas. So these are the citas of the jhanic meditative absorptions, the states of deep samadhi, which are called the jhanas. And first, the wholesome fine material sphere citas are 5-fold. And these 5 are distinguished by the 5 grades of jhana, 5 types of jhana. Now, yesterday, when I was speaking from the standpoint of the suttas, occasionally I spoke about the 4 jhanas. And if you're familiar with the suttas, you again and again you come across 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th jhana. But in the Abhidhamma, one finds 5 jhanas. Why is that? We could see why. Let me note this page so I can get back to it quickly. 28. If we go to okay, so the first jhana has 5 factors that are called the jhana factors. In Pali, we call them vitaka, vichara, piti, sukha, and ekaggata. Here, they're translated initial application, sustained application. Then the third, I don't like this, but zest, happiness, and one-pointedness. So it's here translated zest. I would translate joy or maybe rapture. Okay, now in the sutta description of moving from the first jhana to the second jhana, the first two factors are abandoned simultaneously. So that's the normal course with a meditator. When the concentration deepens, initial application and sustained application drop away. And so in the second jhana, there will be zest, happiness, and one-pointedness. But in the Abhidhamma system, because initial application and sustained application are two different mental factors, they distinguish two jhanas that correspond to the second jhana of the sutta system. So in the second jhana of the Abhidhamma system, one drops initial application, but still has sustained application. And so here one has sustained application, zest, happiness, and one-pointedness. Then the third jhana, you drop sustained application, and you just have zest, happiness, and one-pointedness. The fourth jhana, you drop zest, and you just have happiness and one-pointedness. And then in the fifth jhana, you have, instead of happiness, you have neutral feeling or equanimity and one-pointedness. And so, in the Abhidhamma system, not a good line. These two would come under the second jhana. And so the Abhidhamma system breaks them up because in one case, sustained application is retained, and in the next case, sustained application is discarded. Okay, so we have, these are the 5 wholesome fine material sphere chittas. These are the chittas that occur when a human being or any being attains the jhanic absorption. Then these chittas are able to produce their results. And so we have the 5 fine material sphere resultant chittas. They correspond exactly to the fine material sphere wholesome chittas. And then there are the 5 fine material sphere functional chittas. So these are the chittas that occur when an arahat attains one or another of the 5 jhanas. So the arahat doesn't create any new karma leading to rebirth in the fine material plane of existence. And so he can enjoy the jhanas, but is not creating the karma that leads to rebirth in the fine material realm of existence. And so we have 5, 5, 5. Yeah, the 5 wholesome, 5 resultant, and 5 functional, fine material sphere chittas. And then, in the case of a meditator who goes beyond the jhanas in development of samadhi, this meditator will reach it's called the arupa samapatti, the formless or immaterial meditative attainments. And so there are 4 immaterial attainments, meditative attainments, the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, so in the case of a non-arahat who attains these meditative absorptions, these will be wholesome chittas, so that what goes on in the meditative attainment is a succession, a sequence, unbroken succession of these wholesome, immaterial sphere chittas, one following another. Oops. Okay, so we have wholesome chittas pertaining to each of these four levels. Okay, then those wholesome chittas produce their results. So we have the four corresponding resultant chittas. And then arahats also will, from time to time, in order to maybe to experience that utter tranquility and equanimity of these states, they'll also attain the formless or immaterial meditative absorptions. And so in the case of the arahat, there are the four bare functional chittas pertaining to these four levels. And so we could see that we have four wholesome. When any non-arahat enters into these meditative absorptions, the four results of these meditative attainments, and then in the case of the arahat, the four functional chittas. Okay, beyond this are the supramundane or world-transcending chittas of the four paths and four fruits, but we're not going to be dealing with that because that's not really relevant to dependent origination. And so we don't have any need to refer to them later. This is sort of preparing the groundwork for what's coming later tomorrow. Wow, okay. So now we've completed our survey, page 26. Survey of the different types of chittas. 28. So that's all of the mundane types of chittas. There's 81 mundane types of chittas, 54 relating to the sense sphere, 15 to the fine material sphere, 12 to the immaterial sphere. Okay, now what's the next important topic to take up to prepare the way for what is to come tomorrow is the functions of these chittas. We've already touched on that when I did that brief overview of the series, the sequence of chittas. But now let's look at the chapter that's concerned specifically with that topic. This is in chapter 3. There's a section on functions of consciousness. Yeah, the compendium of functions. Okay, first I'll just read the text and then I'll give the explanation on my own. Okay, so in the compendium of functions, there are 14 functions: rebirth linking, life continuum, adverting. Then comes seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. So these are like the 5 sensory functions. It seems that the mouse doesn't flow smoothly on this table. Okay, so these are performed by eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness. Then comes receiving. We already saw that receiving comes right after the sense consciousness. Then comes the investigating. Then comes determining. Then comes the javana stage, in which one responds to the object and creates the stage in which one creates new karma, and then the moment of registration. And then the last function is that of death, the death consciousness. Now, these 14 functions can be divided into, well, first let me just take this. Okay, so it says that this classification can be divided by way of stage into 10. So we have rebirth, linking, life continuum, adverting, then the five-fold sense consciousness, which will come here, because seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, one of these occurs at one moment. You can't have two of them occurring at the same moment. So one or another will occupy that stage. Them. And then after that comes receiving, investigating, and so on. Okay, now these 14 functions, we can divide them into two broad classes. And this is a very important point. One is what is called, maybe I will call this the purely passive, the purely passive type of resultant consciousness. Or maybe we could call this substratum consciousness. And the other we can call active consciousness, or cognitively active consciousness. Okay, now there are three functions that pertain to what I call substratum consciousness, or passive resultant consciousness. The first of these is rebirth linking, which occurs just for one moment. It's the one mind moment at the very beginning of the new existence. And it's called rebirth linking because this citta links the past existence, which has ended, to the new existence. So it's that first spark of citta that arises at the beginning of the new life, and it just lasts one mind moment. But right after the rebirth linking passes away, it's followed by the life, here it's translated life continuum. And this is, I prefer here to use the Pali word because it's a difficult word to translate. We don't really have a counterpart to it. So this is the Bhavanga consciousness. So whenever in the course of our life, whenever there's no active consciousness, no active cognitive process taking place, what is occurring is this substratum consciousness, which is a series of moments of consciousness occurring in a kind of quiet flow. And it's said that we could see the Bhavanga most clearly in deep, dreamless sleep. Like you go to sleep, and then of course there'll be some dreaming, but periods where no dreaming at all, and then you wake up, and sometimes it could seem like you went to sleep, and then you wake up, it seems like no time has elapsed. And then you look at the clock, and maybe 7 hours have gone by. Well, in a good part of that 7 hours, the consciousness has been operating at the level of the Bhavanga. But it's said that the bhavanga is occurring countless times during the day. Even when I'm sitting here speaking, when you're sitting there listening, you think you're continuously aware of what I'm saying. Well, maybe some people are doodling or dozing off. But at least if you're awake, you think you're continuously aware of what I'm saying. But actually, while I speak, and I seem to be speaking continuously, and you seem to be listening continuously, but again and again, the mind is dropping into the bhavanga, coming out, dropping in, coming out, dropping in, coming out. Maybe to understand this, again, to use a modern analogy, it's like, and this is what I've heard from the technology people, when you're looking at the computer screen, okay, so I'm reading, say, an article on the screen, and it seems the print is there continuously, so I'm reading from word to word. In fact, I have it right in front of me. In the compendium of functions, there are 14 functions. It seems that the screen is right there, stable and solid. But what the computer people tell me is that the screen is actually flashing on and off, on and off, on and off, countless times every second. Is that correct? Do we have any computer people here? I didn't catch that. 45 frames, 25 frames. Okay, so many, many frames per second, but I don't see that. So if I'm talking to a friend and he tells me that, I say, you're talking nonsense. But the professional computer person tells me that, and then I have to accept it. And so, yeah, so this is an analogy. So our mind is like the computer frame, a computer screen, except the computer screen 25 times per second, 45 times per second. In the case of the stream of consciousness, it's thousands of times per second, going into the bhavanga, coming out, going in, coming out. But it's just going by so fast, it seems we're continuously aware. Okay, so this rebirth linking and this life continuum, whenever there's no active cognitive process going on through the whole course of our life, the mind is operating at the level of bhavanga, the life continuum. And then what takes place at the very end of our life is the death consciousness. The death consciousness is just, this isn't the last thought process at the time of death, but this is just the last consciousness that occurs in the course of a life. It's just that one moment when death occurs, exactly that moment when the stream of consciousness is cut off at the end of the life. I compare this citta to when you see a movie, when the movie is over, at least in the old movies, I don't know if they still have them, there would be the words come, the end. So the death consciousness is, in a way, it's like saying the end, except, of course, we know from Paticca Samuppada, it's not really the end, but it's the end of that particular lifespan, the death consciousness, and then there'll be a new rebirth linking consciousness. And now what's important to understand is that the rebirth linking, the life continuum, and the death consciousness, these three are resultant cittas, results of past karma, and they are all the same type of consciousness. It is the same citta, the same resultant citta that performs these three functions. That citta occurs initially for one flash as rebirth linking, then that same citta occurs over and over through the course of life whenever the mind is in the substratum state, the bhavanga state. And then that same kind of citta that now performs this last function as the death consciousness. So that is, these three are the passive resultant types of the passive resultant functions of consciousness of the cittas. The other functions are the active functions. Okay, there's the adverting, which is performed by two cittas. One is the adverting at the five sense doors. So that's one type of citta, turns to an object at one of the five physical sense doors. And then there's another citta which turns to the object at the mind door. That's called the mind door adverting consciousness. So there are two kinds of adverting consciousness. Then we have these five functions of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. These five functions can be performed, each can be performed by two cittas. Can anybody tell me what those two cittas are in the case of seeing? We already covered it earlier this morning. I think I've heard it coming. No, the resultant is not functional. Resultant and functional are different. Okay, seeing, two cittas perform that function. Okay, eye consciousness is correct, but okay, I'm not able to hear well enough from the back, so I'll have to give the answer. Okay, there's disagreeable visible form. What is performing that function? Unwholesome resultant eye consciousness. Agreeable form, wholesome resultant eye consciousness. So each of these five functions can be performed by two types of consciousness. With the disagreeable object, it's an unwholesome resultant, agreeable object, wholesome resultant. Similarly, two kinds of receiving consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant. Investigating consciousness, we know that there are three kinds of investigating consciousness. With a disagreeable object, the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness. With an agreeable object, an ordinary, bland, agreeable object, the investigating, wholesome investigating consciousness accompanied by neutral feeling, and a really nice, agreeable, visible form or sound or whatever, the investigating consciousness accompanied by joyful feeling. Okay, then there's the determining consciousness, or the function of determining, and then the javana is a distinct function, and then registration is a distinct function within the active cognitive process. Okay, so that takes care of these 14 functions. Okay, now we're going to be getting into some difficult territory, treacherous. Let's see, I have to see if I can explain this in a satisfactory way. Because when I did this, I covered this in, I think, the 2014 retreat. Then we had like a whole day to cover it. So these are which cittas perform which functions. We're going to be in for some surprises here. Okay, here we come to the first surprise, and I want to see if I have, where I have my notes on this. Okay, so of all of these citas, 19 types of consciousness perform the functions of rebirth linking, bhavanga, and death. Now, this is going to be a little bit puzzling, so at first. Okay, they are two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. So now when you hear this, maybe it creates some puzzlement. I thought you said that the investigating consciousness performs the function of investigating. So how can that citta perform the function of rebirth linking, life continuum, and death? Okay, to understand this, we have to realize that any citta, or at least many cittas, can perform several functions. And so we designate the citta by way of its primary function, or maybe more distinctive function. But the citta can perform several functions. It's like, let us say we have a man who's let's say a surgeon, so he's a heart surgeon. So we call him maybe Dr. Jones. And so he has Dr. Jones, you look him up in the telephone book, heart surgeon, so on, so on. But also he has a kid. Well, let's say he's married, so in relation to his wife, he's the husband. He's not the surgeon in relation to his wife. He has some kids, so to his kids, he's not Dr. Jones, but he's daddy. And maybe he serves as like the, what do you call this, the coach for his kids' little league baseball team. So people call, all of the kids on the team call him Coach Bob. So the patients call him Dr. Jones. His wife calls him Bob. The kids call him Daddy. The kids on the baseball team call him Coach Bob. So he has these different functions. So maybe most people know him as Dr. Jones because he's primarily known as a surgeon, but he has these other positions, so several functions. And so this type of citta that performs the function of investigation, that type of citta can also perform these three passive functions of rebirth linking, life continuum, and death. So it's only the two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, not the one accompanied by joy. I don't know why, maybe because, I don't know. Okay, and then the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness functions as the rebirth linking life continuum and death consciousness for the beings in the lower realms of existence. So when a person creates unwholesome karma, and then they are reborn in a lower realm of existence because of that unwholesome karma, their substratum consciousness will be that type of consciousness that we call the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness, accompanied by equanimity. But it's not, on that occasion, it's not performing the function of investigation, but it's performing the function first of rebirth linking, then throughout the life, it's performing the function of life continuum, maintaining the continuity of a life. And then at the very end, it performs the function of death. Okay, in the case of the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, so this is wholesome resultant, that citta performs these same three functions for human beings who are born with some kind of mental deficiency, like people with subnormal levels of intelligence, or people with some kind of congenital inherent defect of the sense faculties. Those who are born blind and deaf, not because of something that might happen in the womb or something that happens in later life, but it's inherent in the rebirth process itself, in the rebirth consciousness, that their karma is determining them to rebirth in that kind of mode. So that's a result of wholesome karma to be reborn as a human being, but it's a weak wholesome karma determining the rebirth. And so they're reborn with this, it's a very weak type of rebirth consciousness, the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness. Okay, then the 8 great resultants. These are the 8 resultant cittas corresponding to the 8 wholesome sense sphere cittas. So these 8 great resultants will serve as the rebirth linking, life continuum, and death consciousness for, let's say, human beings and devas, deities in the sense sphere with different grades of mental function. So if you remember, the 8 great resultants can be distinguished into 2 sets depending on whether they have 2 roots or 3 roots. The 2 roots have non-greed, non-hatred. The 3 roots have non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So the most desirable type of rebirth consciousness in the human being is to have a strong 3-rooted rebirth consciousness, to have the root of non-delusion inherent in the rebirth consciousness. And so those who have like normal mental functions, but the intelligence, the ability to grasp, subtle points, particularly of Dharma, and to develop stages of insight, wisdom, if that is limited, it indicates that the root of non-delusion is absent. And so to develop the jhanas, to develop high levels of insight, wisdom, it's essential to have this triple-rooted rebirth consciousness. So the rebirth consciousness with non-delusion inherent in it. So this is why it's important for us as human beings now to sort of study the Dharma and practice the Dharma with understanding. Because it's when we study and cultivate and practice and gain understanding that we're strengthening the root of non-delusion or wisdom, which then becomes part of our constitution at rebirth. Okay, then 9, well, this should be, it says 9 fine material sphere and immaterial sphere resultants, but actually we should break this up. 5 fine material sphere wholesome cittas. Those 5 cittas, well, let's say somebody attains the jhanas, one or another of the 5 jhanas, and they develop and cultivate through their life, they cultivate the jhana regularly. And so that jhana consciousness then will govern the rebirth process and produce rebirth into the fine material realm of existence as a divinity, a divine being in one of the jhana realms. And so the being who is when a being is reborn in the Brahma world, in the fine material realm, their rebirth linking, life continuum, and death consciousness will be the jhana consciousness that corresponds to their level of jhana attainment in the human realm. So let's say I'm a human meditator, maybe I'm attaining the third jhana, and I don't get the fourth jhana, or I just get it intermittently, but I have a strong mastery over the third jhana. So when I die, then that jhana consciousness will govern the rebirth process, and then I'll be reborn in the plane of existence corresponding to the third jhana, and my rebirth consciousness and bhavanga will be the resultant consciousness of the third jhana. And that will remain sort of my substratum consciousness throughout the course of my life for hundreds and thousands of years in the fine material realm. And so we have 5 levels of jhana consciousness, rebirth consciousness. And then we have our yogi goes on to the immaterial jhanas, the formless meditations, masters a certain level of the formless meditation. And then when he passes away, he's reborn by the force. Let's say he masters the base of infinite consciousness. And so then he'll be reborn in the realm of infinite consciousness, and that consciousness, the realm of infinite consciousness, it's a little confusing, okay. Let's say the realm of nothingness. Okay, he masters the realm of nothingness, and so the consciousness that he's developed by practicing the nothingness meditation, the base of nothingness meditation, governs the rebirth process, and so he'll be reborn in the realm of nothingness, and the rebirth linking, life continuum, and death consciousness will be the resultant consciousness of the base of nothingness. So in a sense, it's like I throw the ball against the wall. That's the karmic consciousness of the jhana, and the ball bounces back to me with an equal force. That's the resultant consciousness resulting from that level of meditative attainment. And so here it says we have 9, which actually means 5 fine material sphere citas, 4 immaterial sphere citas are performing the function of rebirth linking, life continuum, and death consciousness. Okay, that's a pretty heavy. Maybe I'll pause and ask whether any questions on this. Okay, William, was that your name? Yeah, to make sure that we have the wireless mic. I have to warn you, what I have this afternoon gets more complicated than this.
I have 2 interrelated questions.
Yeah.
One is the death moment. I've heard it's very important, the death moment. Now, one person's lying in a monastery, the monks are chanting, the other person's parachute doesn't open. Does the death moment, does that matter?
Okay, this is an interesting and important question. There's a difference between the death, what's called the death proximate process. That is the process of what's taking place in the active phase of consciousness as one is approaching death. And so your example, say the person lying on the deathbed with the monks chanting, maybe there's an image of the Buddha in front of him, all of that is conditioning the death proximate process. And the other case, somebody, say, sadly, the thing that happens, somebody goes shopping, and then the angry man with the gun comes in and shoots and kills, and then, with sudden shock, no expectation of what's happening, and That's another kind of death proximate process. That is different from the death moment. The death moment is not part of one's life story as such, but it's just the one moment of sign-off, the end.
Based on your karma.
Yeah, that is based on the same karma that brought the rebirth linking and the bhavanga. It's the same type of
That may
consciousness.
be the answer to the, am I in a different system when I think about choosing my own parents so that I can fulfill my destiny? Is this part of this system? Or, because when you say a handicapped child,
Yeah,
that could be a plus
yeah,
if you had a certain karma to fulfill.
yeah, yeah. One could look at it from a way that having certain handicaps and disabilities can be a way of developing certain skills. But well, what one would say is that to have that handicap or disability from the karmic standpoint would be the result of an unwholesome karma coming to fruition.
And the part about choosing our parents.
I don't think one really chooses one's parents as such, but one gets, let's say one has maybe a certain affinity or connection with certain people who then become one's parents.
Because they'll help, that situation would help us to continue our destiny as we're going.
I don't know that it's necessarily helpful.
I'm sorry.
But there can be some kind of karmic connection that ties one to particular people as one's parents. Okay, I see Regina and...
Thank you so much, Bhante. So I have a question regarding the practitioner who's practicing the jhanas.
Yeah.
And she or he is working really hard to
Yeah.
attain higher levels of jhanic
Yeah.
consciousness. So they'll be reborn in that particular
Yeah.
jhanic realm.
Yeah.
So then how does that work, though? However, if there is this no self thing, does the person who's like spent their whole life practicing get the reward of this fine material existence, or
Yeah.
someone else gets it?
Okay, it's a good question. And I think the answer, in a way, would be in one of the sutta passages that I had in the selection of suttas, which it's in the selection of suttas that I compiled, but I didn't take that sutta yesterday because of lack of time. Okay, from the standpoint of non-self, there's no self or substantial entity which develops the jhana here and then retains its identity and goes off into the fine material realm and experiences the result there. So it's not a persisting self that goes from one realm to another, but there is this continuity of consciousness, of the stream of consciousness. So the stream of consciousness that I now refer to myself as Bhikkhu Bodhi, if I attain the jhana, and then to be reborn in the form realm, the fine materials realm, the consciousness of the being that arises in the fine material realm, their stream of consciousness is in the same continuum as my stream of as what I call my stream of consciousness. Again, to use a similar, maybe use the familiar simile of the river. So the waters of the Hudson River go on flowing and flowing from the top, the origin point of the Hudson River, to the bottom of the Hudson River, but it's never the same water that's flowing. The water is, actually that simile doesn't work so well. Let us say I light the candle. Okay, so I light a candle and I have the flame on this candle. When the candle burns down, then I take another candle and I transfer the flame to the second candle, and then this candle goes out. And so the flame keeps on burning, and then I transfer this flame to the third candle, to a fourth candle. So the flame keeps on burning in continuity, even though there's no the flame is always changing, always burning, new molecules of the wax, of oxygen, and so forth. But it maintains its continuity from candle to candle. Yeah.
If it's not me and it's a continuum thing, I could be traveling or going out with friends rather than assiduously doing meditation practice. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of like...
I don't think so.
It's kind of the what's in it for me. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just, I'm kind of curious, like,
No, because in a sense, let's say the subject of experience, it's not a substantial self, but let's keep it in one life. We don't even have to go to a second life. Okay, so here I am at, what year is it? 2019. Okay, so I'm practicing the samatha meditation, samadhi meditation, hoping to attain the jhanas. And so it's a lot of work. I have to give up a lot of things and spend a lot of time in seclusion. And sometimes the meditation is very dry, boring, frustrating, but I have a lot of trust and confidence in it. And so I go on with all of this work, and then maybe several months later, 2020, I enter into the first jhana. Okay, and then I'm experiencing this piti, this joy, and sukha, this bliss, and so forth. Okay, there's no self here that's going on, doing the struggling and striving, and then entering the jhana. There's no self there, but it's the effort that I put into the work of cultivation now that culminates in that bliss of the jhana a year later. And so it's the same stream of consciousness, though there's no me or I as a lasting entity that puts in the effort and then a year later reaps the benefits. But still, because of that, I'm anticipating that bliss and joy, so I put in the effort, and then through the effort, I get the reward. And we could just extend that to the difference from one life to the next. The body is different, but the stream of consciousness is in continuity. Okay, first this gentleman. What is your name? Paul.
Looking at this, because Buddha basically discovered all this himself, and he experienced that, and then he taught to other people that experience themselves. Yeah. But Buddha, when he discovered that, for him it was all new. He was just doing some type of uncharted territory. So now for us it's very easy because we have all this teaching, a lot easier than for himself. So I'm just wondering, at that point, you know, when he was doing all these different moment-to-moment jhanas, and you know, how would it be done if this process is not a natural process? Because the way that, you know, it seems now, it seems very natural, but for him doing it the first time, it was not natural.
Yeah, it's a good question. I have to say I don't know that I can answer it or answer in detail. But what we find in the account of the Buddha's life, and probably this would have been results of his practices and past lives, that, you know, when he was on the quest for enlightenment, first he studied under several meditation masters who taught him the formless or immaterial meditation. So he'd attained those under his teachers, and then later he found that they didn't lead to the enlightenment he was seeking. Then he took this wrong course, experimenting with all of these extreme ascetic practices, self-mortification, and they didn't work. And so then when he was sort of at the point of desperation, he remembered a childhood experience when he was sitting alone at the famous plowing festival, and he entered the first jhana. And then the thought occurred to him, could this be the way to enlightenment? And then he realized, this must be the way to enlightenment. And then he realized he couldn't do that practice with an emaciated body, so he started to take regular food till he regained his strength, and then he entered into the 4 jhanas. But that was really something not completely new to the Indian scene. What was new would be the discovery of insight meditation, and then the attainment of the realization of the dependent origination and the 4 noble truths.
And the second question is regarding this Bardo type of consciousness at the time of death, because in the Tibetan Buddhism, they're talking about this intermediate state between the rebirth.
Yeah.
So is there also continuity of the consciousness after death in another type of...
I would say even in the Bardo state, there's a continuity of consciousness. It's a state between one fixed existence and another, but consciousness is continuing there. Okay, I saw Maricela had her hand. We could just take one. Is it a short, quick question or a complicated one? No, I wasn't pointing to you in the back. Okay, we take Maricela. The others will have to either wait patiently till the late afternoon, or you could again write your questions on slips of paper and put them on the table.
Thank you, Bhante. Is the stream of consciousness, the bhavanga, it continues countless lifetimes, but is the content the same?
Okay, that's a very good question. But it's a little complicated. Okay, first, the bhavanga as such is different in any given lifetime. So the bhavanga begins immediately after the rebirth linking consciousness, and then it will continue whenever there's not active consciousness occurring. It continues as this, I call it the substratum level, right up to the end of the life, when the same kind of consciousness occurs as the death consciousness. Okay, in the next life, also, the bhavanga will occur as the substratum consciousness, but the bhavanga in the next life will be different because the rebirth consciousness and the bhavanga of this life is determined by the karma that produced this life. The karma of the past that produces this life generates the rebirth and bhavanga consciousness of this life. But in my active thought processes, my active consciousness, I'm creating new karma. And of that new karma, some particularly effective karma will take on the role of generating my next life. And that karma that generates the next life does so by producing the rebirth linking and bhavanga consciousness of the next life. And so the content is different, but every life, every sentient being, for every sentient being, their substratum consciousness is the bhavanga. That is what maintains the continuity of the life. And speaking about continuity of life, it depends not only on bhavanga, but also on edible food, one of the four nutriments of life. And so I think it's time for us to break for lunch. And then we come back for the meditation at 20 to 2. And then we will continue with this investigation of consciousness and then conditional relations in the afternoon. And if you have questions, again, that I didn't answer, I think the best way is to write them and put them on slips of paper on the table. Oh, okay. There's going to be a group photograph now. So we can all go. You'll have to hold off the lunch for 5 minutes. Okay, okay. So, okay, change of plan. No. Yeah. Change of plans, a wholesome, resultant, rootless tongue consciousness will get a chance to arise more quickly. So the photograph will be postponed until 2 o'clock. Yeah, we'll finish the meditation a little earlier and then do the group photo after the meditation. Okay, so we stand and do 3 half bows to the Buddha. Let me just close up this.